Welcome to The Backstory, a podcast from the North Dakota News Cooperative that takes an in-depth look at the stories we're reporting for you. I'm Sabrina Halvorson, CEO of the North Dakota News Cooperative. So we're doing something a little bit different today. I normally have Michael starting on the podcast right out the gate, but today we are starting with another guest, Mary Jo, who is one of the board members for the North Dakota News Cooperative, and very important for this project is your baby that we do with our North Dakota News Cooperative poll. Mary Jo, would you please start out, just introduce yourself to our listeners, tell us who you are and what you do.
Sure. Mary Jo Hotzler is my name. I am on the NDNC board, but my other job is for Foreign Communications Company. I'm the Chief Content Officer for Foreign Communications Company based in Fargo and have been with Foreign Communications for more than 20 years in various roles. I was an original member of the North Dakota News Co-op board. I've been around for a while and really believed strongly in the public opinion polling idea, which is why I got involved in this a couple of years ago when we started doing this. I just think it's a really important part of the mission that we serve.
And that is what we wanted to talk about today. We have done our latest poll, and the community poll is something that we do every few months at the North Dakota News Cooperative. And it's a big undertaking, and it's something that you've taken by the horns and lead us through. Tell us a little bit about what goes on in the background. Starting off with, we are using a different company. We don't do the poll ourselves. We have professional companies that do this.
Yeah.
And so we contract with them. And so tell me, what goes into that starting process?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot that goes on behind the scenes because it's incredibly important that the poll data that we put out there is accurate and credible. And this time around, we work with a company called Mason-Dixon polling company. Now, they have been around for a really long time and have done public opinion polling really in every state. And they do a lot of work specifically with media organizations. And so a lot of the major media organizations use Mason-Dixon for their polling, which is great because they understand some of what goes into polling from the standpoint of needing to be just completely nonpartisan and coming at it from the center. So Mason-Dixon, yeah, very active. One of the things that's unique about them that we really liked is that they do all live telephone interviews, which polling has gotten more complicated, I think, over time. In some ways, you'd think maybe it would get easier, but a lot of people don't have landlines anymore. People don't necessarily, we don't have a phone book. We don't have published numbers everywhere. But they subscribe to a lot of different services. They have phone numbers. And so what they do is live telephone interviews, and that's a mixture of landlines and cell phone numbers they have, so that we're sure to also get some of those people who might be on that younger demographic who aren't going to have a landline, but we still want to make sure that we include them in this poll to be representative. That's one of the things about them, and they are known to be very accurate. And so that also is great for what we're doing. This particular poll was conducted August 4th through the 6th. So took them a few days to get this done, interviewed 625 people during that time. And there are some cases, of course, where they have to screen to make sure that they have quotas that assigned to reflect voter turnout in different counties. So there's a lot that goes into it on their end to make sure that truly what we're giving you is representative of the voting public in North Dakota.
Let's talk a little bit about that nonpartisan part of this all, because that's something that's really important to us at the North Dakota News Cooperative, especially as we're bringing people news. It's been very important to us to stay nonpartisan and to not lay on one side or the other, pretty much. So in finding a company that reflects that in our polling, how important was that as well?
That's the utmost importance, I would say. Especially a lot of the polls that we've done up until this point too have been polls related to election races, and people definitely can get, what's the word? I don't know, bent out of shape is the right word, but maybe that's too strong. But when these polls are potentially are where the questions are too leading, where it feels like it's leaning one way or another. That really just skews everything. And I think ultimately that has an impact on credibility. And so as journalists and as the news co-op, the credibility piece to us is so important. And that's probably the number one thing that as a board we talked about, is how to make sure we have just a really strong company that's doing this polling, that's experienced in this, and that isn't in any way, shape, or form taking sides. And there are a lot of great polling companies out there, definitely. But certainly a lot of polling companies do more work with the individual parties and party affiliations or special interest groups than they do with the media. So in this case, it was a nice find for us to work with a group that has some experience, has a lot of experience, I should say, with media organizations in general, because they can really prioritize that need for us.
I also want to talk about the polling size, the sample size, excuse me, because in a state like North Dakota, obviously we don't have a large population, but to have that large of a sample size for our poll, I was really impressed with that the company was able to do that.
Yeah.
Now, have had experience with another nonprofit, not related to this at all, but I was in your role where I was the person on the board that was in charge of the poll that we did every year, or excuse me, with that company or that nonprofit, it was every other year. But we had, and this was a national poll, and we had a hard time getting that sample size. So I'm really pleased with this sample
Yeah.
size. And tell us a little bit more, Mary Jo, about why that's important.
Yeah. The more you have, the more people you have, ultimately, the more accurate this is going to be. And so with 625 people interviewed in North Dakota, that equates to a plus or minus 4% accuracy rate. And that's considered good for polling. In talking with the folks who run this company, I think that places like North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, in some ways are easier places to conduct this type of polling in. We have fewer barriers here. I think they're probably, I don't have the numbers to back this up, but there are still people with landlines here. I think that's sort of Midwest nice. We give people the benefit of the doubt. People do still answer their phones around here by and large. Another thing that they mentioned is one of their biggest challenges in some other states is language barrier. And that, for example, they're doing a poll in Florida. There isn't a guarantee that they're going to pick up the phone and this is going to translate, this is going to work. And so the language barrier, they said, is a big issue in other places, that they don't have that challenge in a lot of the Midwest states. And I got the impression that they enjoy doing polling in these parts of the country because maybe just a few things that were easier about it, that they were able to conduct it. Because like I said, the 4th through the 6th took place over 3 days. Initially, they said it might be 4 or 5 days. And so it was completed actually in a shorter period of time than expected. So I guess that's a nod to North Dakotans being willing to answer their phone and participate and share their opinion. And it was representative. With 625, we were able to be representative of looking at both party line, making sure that we had a representative split for that, as well as age and gender.
And then the other thing I wanted to talk about was the questions themselves. And we don't have to go specifically into what the questions were. We will be releasing that information. We have a story that's coming out already that Michael has done. Our reporter is working on it. We'll have a few more stories coming out. But wording the questions has been very important. And it's something that you put a lot of effort into. And there was a lot of teamwork that went into it so that our questions were worded appropriately. And as you mentioned earlier, they weren't leading questions. And we, again, tried to stay nonpartisan in them. What goes into that?
So it starts out at our board level, where we might talk about at the high level topics. What are those issues that the North Dakotans are talking about, that our legislators are talking about? What do we want to weigh in on? And so we start at that high level, at that topic level. And then from there, I take those topics and I start to drill down into specific questions or specific ideas of what we're curious about. Or I might look at this bill passed in the legislature, but it was related to this topic, but gosh, it was a split, but maybe we want to ask specifically about that. And so I take an initial run at very loose versions of questions from my vantage point based on what I know. And then at that point, I turn that over to Mason-Dixon. I turn that over to the polling company. And then the expert there goes through all of those questions and fine tunes them, changes them in some cases to be more, just, I guess the language maybe even more straightforward even than I might have had it, based on how they ask questions, right? They have a formula for that, and they have a standard way that they ask questions. And so they just take our input on what we want to understand and what we want to know from citizens and kind of work their magic on it and then spit it back to us. And of course, there's a little bit of back and forth sometimes there. We want to make sure that the questions are easy to understand. We don't want to be confusing. Sometimes legislation can be confusing. And so you got to be really careful about not perpetuating that. But it was a pretty smooth process overall this time around. I think that it's maybe been trickier in the past when it's been an election related, as we call it, is like the horse race polls. Those can definitely be tricky because you cannot have one word off in those situations. It's a smooth process, but it's also, there's a lot of back and forth and a lot of double checking and triple checking.
I have to say that I am very proud of our polls, and that's because of all the work that you've put into it, and you really have taken this project on. And I have seen other polls, not ours, but even on national news TV, you see where they've conducted a poll, and it turned out they talked to 30 people nationwide. And how I don't you even call that a poll? You've got 30 opinions out of how many millions? So to see the work that's been done on our poll, to see what North Dakotans are actually thinking, and to take the real temperature of our state, I think it can serve a big service. We can again see what exactly is going on in our state, but then that attention to make sure that we have the right sample size and that every word and every question is exactly as it should be. And again, you do it every few months, so thank you for that.
Yes, and nobody's perfect. Obviously, and even in the polling, of course, there's margin of error in this, but as long as that's the idea behind the sample size and kind of the questions, as accurate as you can humanly be is what you need to do in this situation. And because, like you said, it is a service to people. Our purpose is to be connecting the leaders of this state with the people in the state. Accountability is a big factor in polling. Informing policy, of course, that has a role in all of this too. It's a really important function and it's important that we do it, and it's important that we get it right.
And thank you to Mary Jo Hotzler for joining me on our podcast this week to talk all about the North Dakota News Cooperative poll. This has been a special edition of The Backstory. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. Thanks for joining us.